You think you're strong because you keep explaining yourself. You think you're mature because you try to be fair. You think you're intelligent because you can argue your point clearly. But here is the shocking truth most men never face. Every time you argue, you are exposing weakness, not because your ideas are wrong, but because the act of arguing itself puts you beneath the person you're trying to convince. Right now, people around you know exactly which buttons to press. They know you will react, they know you will defend, they know you will explain, and because of that, they control the frame while you stay trapped inside it. Look at your life closely. At work, someone interrupts you, dismisses your idea, or takes credit for it. You feel that pressure rise in your chest, and you start justifying, clarifying, pushing back. You think you're standing up for yourself, but what really happens is simple. The room watches who is calm and who is reactive. The calm one holds power, the reactive one looks uncertain. In relationships, someone pulls away, cancels plans, or tests your patience. You feel the urge to talk it out, to explain how you feel, to fix the tension. You think communication will save you, but what you're really doing is showing how much the situation controls you. With friends or family, they ask for your time, your energy, your attention. You say yes, even when you don't want to. And when resentment builds, you argue, you try to make them understand, but they already understand one thing clearly: you are available, you are predictable, you are manageable. This didn't happen by accident. You were trained this way. From childhood, you were taught that being reasonable makes you good, that explaining yourself makes you mature, that arguing fairly means you are right, but no one taught you how power actually works. Society doesn't raise men to be powerful, it raises them to be useful. Useful men explain, useful men justify, useful men argue, powerful men observe, decide, and move without noise. Over 500 years ago, Niccolò Machiavelli watched this exact pattern play out among rulers, generals, and advisors. He wasn't interested in how people should behave. He studied how they actually behave. He saw that arguments rarely change outcomes. Power does. Perception does, control of emotion does, and he wrote something most people still refuse to accept. Those who rely on being loved, understood, or agreed with are always at risk. Those who can remain unmoved, unclear, and unreactive shape the outcome without force. This video will show you the cold strategy behind never needing to argue, not to become cruel, not to become silent out of fear, but to become unmovable. You'll learn how to stop being pulled into other people's frames, how to make manipulation fail without confrontation, how to shift from being the one who reacts to being the one who decides. These truths will make you harder to read, harder to control, and harder to disrespect. Some people will leave before this ends. They will feel attacked and uncomfortable. That's because this knowledge removes excuses. If you stay, it means you're ready to see the game clearly. Put your phone face down for a moment and just listen. And if this hits you, write "I am the strategist" once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset changed. Now let's break down the truths you were never taught. The first truth is simple but brutal. The person who argues is already on the defensive. In real life, arguments don't start when someone attacks you. They start when you feel the need to prove something. At work, when someone challenges your decision, you rush to explain why you're right. In social situations, when someone questions your choices, you justify your reasons. You believe clarity equals strength. Machiavelli would tell you the opposite. When you explain too much, you reveal insecurity. You show that your position depends on approval, and once people sense that, they push harder. Machiavelli understood that power is not about being correct. It's about being unshakable. He observed that leaders who felt the need to convince everyone lost authority quickly, not because their ideas were bad, but because authority weakens when it begs for agreement. In modern terms, every explanation is a signal. It says, "I need you to accept this." The more you argue, the more you tell people that their opinion has power over your emotional state. Psychologically, this happens because most people are not seeking truth in arguments. They are testing status. When someone questions you, interrupts you, or disagrees sharply, they are watching your reaction. If you tense up, raise your voice, or over-explain, they learn that they can move you. That's all they need. The argument becomes a tool, not a discussion. The power shift is quiet. Instead of defending instantly, you slow down, you let silence stretch, you say less than expected. A simple "I hear you" or "that's noted" ends most power tests. You don't need to win the argument. You need to refuse the frame that demands you explain. Try this the next time someone pushes you to justify yourself. Pause, breathe, respond with fewer words than they expect. Watch how the energy changes. The pressure moves off you and back onto them. The second truth is that people argue to control outcomes, not to understand you. You've been taught that communication solves problems. Sometimes it does, but in power dynamics, arguments are often bait. In relationships, when someone says, "We need to talk," it often means, "I want you to move." They want reassurance, they want effort, they want emotional investment. And when you argue your feelings, explain your intentions, or promise change too fast, you give them exactly what they want. Machiavelli warned that those who show their inner state too freely give others a map. When people know what upsets you, what calms you, what you fear losing, they gain leverage. Modern psychology calls this emotional transparency. Machiavelli would call it strategic weakness. The more someone knows how to trigger you, the easier it is to steer you. Think about how manipulators operate. They provoke reactions. They ask loaded questions. They challenge your identity. Why are you so distant? Why are you acting like this? These questions are not about understanding. They are about pulling you into defense mode. Once you're there, you argue. You explain. You chase clarity. And while you do, the other person controls the direction. The shift here is restraint. You don't refuse communication. You refuse urgency. You don't argue your emotions. You observe patterns. When someone tries to pull you into an emotional debate, you slow the pace. You say, "I'll think about it," or "We can talk later." This delay does two things. It breaks the manipulation loop, and it shows that you are not governed by pressure. Machiavelli knew that time is a weapon. Those who control timing control outcomes. The third truth is that arguing makes you predictable, and predictability kills power. People don't need to overpower you if they can anticipate you. If they know you will always respond, always explain, always seek resolution, they can plan around you. In workplaces, this means colleagues test boundaries because they know you won't enforce consequences. In social circles, it means people take liberties because you'll smooth things over. In dating, it means someone can pull away and count on you to chase clarity. Machiavelli emphasized that unpredictability creates caution. When people don't know how you'll respond, they treat you with more respect. Not fear, respect, because uncertainty forces restraint. When your reactions are automatic, you become safe to push. When your reactions are controlled, people think twice. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first. You've been trained to fill gaps. Silence feels like loss of control. In reality, silence is a power vacuum, and most people rush to fill it. When you stop arguing, others often reveal more than they intended. They over-explain, they justify, they expose motives. All you have to do is watch. Practice this in small ways. When someone makes a passive-aggressive comment, don't defend. Let it hang. When someone pressures you for a decision, don't argue your reasoning. Delay. Over time, people learn that pushing you doesn't produce predictable reactions. That alone changes how they approach you. Another truth Machiavelli understood deeply is that respect is built through boundaries, not explanations. You may think people cross your boundaries because they don't understand them. Often, they understand perfectly. They just don't believe there are consequences. When you argue about boundaries, you weaken them. You turn limits into debates, and anything that can be debated can be ignored. In families, this looks like constant justification. You explain why you can't help this time. You argue about why your time matters. But notice what happens. The requests don't stop. In work, you explain why a deadline is unreasonable. The workload stays the same. The explanation becomes background noise. Machiavelli observed that laws without enforcement invite violation. The same applies to personal boundaries. The moment you feel the need to argue for your limits, you signal that they are flexible. The powerful response is simple action. You say no without a speech. You enforce through consistency, not persuasion. This doesn't mean being rude. It means being firm. I'm not available. Full stop. No story. No defense. When people realize that your no doesn't open a discussion, they adjust. Some will leave. That's not loss. That's clarity. Another core truth is that arguing ties your identity to outcomes you don't control. When you argue, you invest emotionally in winning, and when you don't win, you feel diminished. Machiavelli advised rulers never to stake their identity on any single interaction. Power comes from flexibility, not attachment. In modern life, this shows up online constantly. Debates, comments, opinions. You feel compelled to respond, to correct, to prove, but every argument anchors your emotional state to strangers' reactions. That's a loss of sovereignty. The more you argue, the more you outsource your sense of self. The psychological mechanism here is ego defense. When someone challenges your view, it feels like a challenge to your worth. Arguing becomes self-protection. But Machiavelli would say that a strong position doesn't need constant defense. It simply exists. The shift is internal. You detach your identity from being right. You stop needing others to see your logic. This frees enormous mental energy. You choose when engagement serves strategy, not ego. Most arguments disappear when you no longer need validation. Another truth is that calmness is more intimidating than aggression. Raised voices invite resistance. Calm silence invites uncertainty. Machiavelli noted that fear is more reliable than love, but uncontrolled fear backfires. What he pointed to was controlled presence. A man who doesn't argue, doesn't rush, and doesn't react creates a subtle pressure. Others sense that something is different. They become cautious. In negotiations, in leadership, in relationships, the calm person sets the pace. When someone tries to provoke you and fails, they feel exposed. Their tactic didn't work. Over time, they stop trying. This is not about suppressing emotion. It's about choosing expression. You feel anger, frustration, disappointment, but you don't leak it through arguments. You process it privately, then you act cleanly. Action, not debate, is the final truth Machiavelli teaches. After understanding these truths, something shifts. You stop seeing arguments as battles to win. You see them as traps to avoid. You realize that most conflicts don't require engagement. They require positioning. You become selective, and that selectivity changes your life. If you ignore this knowledge, nothing changes. You remain readable. People continue to test you. You stay busy explaining while others decide. But when you apply it, the environment responds. People speak more carefully. They test less. They respect your time. You feel calmer. not numb, calm, because your energy is no longer scattered across unnecessary battles. This is not about becoming cold for the sake of it, it's about becoming hard to manipulate. Machiavelli wasn't teaching evil, he was describing reality, the same reality you move through every day. Power exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Understanding it simply lets you stop losing without knowing why. So here is your challenge. Pick one situation today where you would normally argue, at work, at home, in a message, and don't pause. Say less, enforce through action, not explanation. Watch the result, let reality teach you. If this opened your eyes, you already know what to do. And if this hit you, write "I am the strategist" once in the comments, just to mark the day your mindset changed. And once you start living this way, you'll notice something that feels almost unsettling at first. The world doesn't collapse when you stop arguing. People don't disappear. Situations don't explode. In fact, most of the noise fades. The constant friction you thought was normal begins to look unnecessary. You start to see how many conflicts were never real conflicts at all. They were tests. They were probes. They were attempts to see how easily you could be moved. Machiavelli understood that most power struggles are silent. They happen beneath words, beneath logic, beneath emotion. When you argued before, you were fighting on the surface level, where outcomes are random and driven by ego. When you stop arguing, you drop beneath the surface, where leverage lives. This is where strategy replaces reaction. Think about how people behave around someone who never takes the bait. At first, they escalate. Louder questions, sharper tones, passive aggression. This is not strength, this is frustration. Their old tools no longer work, and when tools fail, people either adapt or retreat. Both outcomes benefit you. You'll see this clearly in social environments. The person who used to dominate conversations by challenging everyone suddenly avoids challenging you. Not because you intimidated them openly, but because you no longer give them energy. Power is fed by attention, arguing feeds it directly, silence starves it. This is why Machiavelli placed such importance on perception. He knew that people judge power not by moral correctness, but by emotional control. When you don't argue, you look composed. When you look composed, others assume you have options. And when people believe you have options, they treat you differently. At work, this becomes especially visible. Managers, co-workers, clients, they all test boundaries unconsciously. When you used to argue deadlines, workloads, or decisions, you signaled investment without authority. Now, when you respond calmly, briefly, and without emotional charge, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer asking to be heard. You're deciding what you engage with. That alone elevates your position. Machiavelli would remind you that authority is rarely given willingly. It's inferred. People decide who to respect based on behavior patterns, not titles or words. Arguing places you in the pattern of the pleader. Non-reactivity places you in the pattern of the decider. This also changes how you experience your own mind. Before, arguments stayed with you. You replayed conversations. You refined points you should have made. You felt drained. That wasn't because you were weak. It was because arguing fragments attention. It keeps your mind occupied with things you can't control. When you stop arguing, your mental space clears. You think better. You plan better. You notice patterns instead of getting lost in moments. Machiavelli believed that clarity was the ruler's greatest weapon. You can't see the board if you're emotionally invested in every move. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means when you do, your words carry weight. Silence increases value. Scarcity always does. When you're no longer constantly explaining, people listen more carefully when you finally speak. You'll also notice that some people don't like this change. They benefited from your old behavior. They had access to your time, your energy, your emotions. When that access closes, they may accuse you of changing, becoming distant or cold. This is a predictable response. Machiavelli warned that withdrawing availability exposes hidden dependencies. This is where most men break. They feel guilt. They feel pressure to return to the old role. They start explaining again. Don't. Guilt is often a signal that you're no longer being easily controlled. You are not responsible for maintaining other people's comfort at the expense of your clarity. In relationships, this shift is even more powerful. When you stop arguing about feelings, intentions, or plans, you stop negotiating desire, you stop chasing reassurance, you allow space, and space reveals truth faster than any conversation ever could. If someone respects you, they adjust. If they don't, they push harder. Either way, you gain information. Arguments delay truth. Silence accelerates it. Machiavelli valued speed of understanding. He preferred reality over comforting illusions. You may notice that when you stop arguing, people start volunteering information. They explain themselves. They justify their actions. This reversal is not accidental. Humans are uncomfortable with unresolved silence. When you don't fill it, they do. And what they reveal is often more honest than anything they would say in an argument. This is one of the coldest advantages of restraint. You learn more while exposing less. Machiavelli believed that appearing open while remaining guarded was a powerful position. In modern terms, you become observant without being transparent. As this becomes your default, your reputation changes quietly. You become known as someone who doesn't get pulled into drama, someone who doesn't overreact, someone who decides rather than debates. These traits attract respect in environments where words are cheap and emotions are loud. This also reshapes how you see conflict. You stop seeing it as something to resolve and start seeing it as something to manage. Not every tension needs closure. Not every disagreement needs clarity. Many resolve themselves when you stop feeding them. Machiavelli would say that the strongest position is the one that requires the least effort to maintain. Arguing requires constant effort. Silence backed by action requires very little. Once established, it sustains itself. There is also a deeper internal change. You begin to trust yourself more. When you no longer rely on arguments to defend your choices, you stop outsourcing confidence. Your decisions feel cleaner. You move faster. Doubt fades because you're no longer seeking permission. This doesn't turn you into a machine. You still feel, you still care, but your care is no longer weaponized against you. You choose where it goes. That choice is the core of personal power. Machiavelli understood that most men lose power not through force, but through leakage, emotional leakage, verbal leakage, attention leakage. Arguing is one of the biggest leaks there is. Closing it doesn't make you cold. It makes you contained. Over time, this containment becomes visible in your posture, your voice, your pace. You speak slower, you interrupt less, you react later. These small signals compound. People read them instinctively. You don't have to announce anything. Your behavior does it for you. And here's the part few talk about. When you stop arguing, you stop lying to yourself. Many arguments are ways to avoid action. You debate instead of deciding. You explain instead of enforcing. You talk instead of walking away. Silence forces honesty. It asks one question only: what are you going to do? That question is uncomfortable. But it's real. Machiavelli respected reality above all else. He believed that facing it, without decoration, was the beginning of strength. So if you want to continue this path, keep it simple. Notice the urge to argue. Pause when it appears. Ask yourself what outcome you actually want. Then choose the behavior that moves you closer to it with the least noise. Most of the time, That behavior will not involve convincing anyone of anything. It will involve adjusting your availability, your effort, or your presence. That is where leverage lies, and as you apply this, one final shift happens. You stop needing to win, because you stop playing games that were never worth winning. You become selective, strategic, calm. This is what Machiavelli saw centuries ago. Power doesn't shout, it doesn't explain, it doesn't argue, it moves quietly and lets the world respond. If you continue practicing this, you won't need to announce your change. Others will feel it, and that is always more effective.